lots of questions about the book, but I want to jump in right away to begin with to talk a little bit about the relationship, your relationship, editor to writer, and the process that you engage in. You've been together for a number of books,
Yeah.
and how has that relationship changed? How is editing The Astral any different from the other books? Can you talk a little bit about how Kate came to you and what the process has been like there?
Yeah, I think starting at the beginning is a useful thing to do. I had come to Anchor Books in 1998 as the editor-in-chief, and I'd worked at Norton for 10 years before that, and I was sorting my way through a new cast of characters and feeling my way into the opportunities and the problems that every publishing house. And one of the odd pieces of business before us was that there was this novel called In the Drink, which by Kate Christensen, a first novel, and oddly, it had been acquired by a very young and obviously prescient editor by the name of Danelle Downham, who deserves a lot of credit.
She had to fight to acquire it. Nobody there liked it.
Something like that, yeah. But her boss, Pat Mulcahy, did.
No, she did.
Well, maybe she didn't.
This is what I heard, that Pat had to leave Doubleday before Danelle could acquire it.
Absolutely not.
Because it echoed their relationship too closely. This isn't true?
That's completely wrong.
I know that's right.
Anyway, well, one of the oddities of this was that it had been signed up by Doubleday, but its paperback fate was in limbo, whether Anchor wanted to do it or not. And so this was puzzling to me. Why would you sign up a book if you didn't want to do it in paperback? So I was at a couple of editorial meetings where this was question was hanging fire, and I said, can I read this thing that you're talking about? And yeah, I liked it, and the problem I think that was facing the company, which was trying to figure out, God help me, how to sell it, was like the problem. But
Chick Lit wasn't around yet.
Well, you were a leading indicator of
I was
Chick Lit.
the first light of Chick Lit.
Yeah, but I just thought, shit, this is really well written, and possibly it occurs to me now I may have been identifying and not knowing it with a character who had spent a lot of her 20s basically fucking up, which I didn't do as good a job as Claudia, but
Neither did I.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
But what I remember was the moment that the hook really got in and stuck there was this description where Claudia Steiner, this young fucking up woman, is coming out of her apartment in the East Village at like around 9:45, and she's really got a hangover, and she's late for work, and what does the street in New York, in the Village, look like and feel like under those circumstances at that time? And I thought, wow, she nailed it. I said, what is the problem here? So I, by fiat, sort of said, we're doing this in paperback, and
Thank you.
yeah, it was the right thing to do. And subsequent to that, I did not edit In the Drink. In fact, I did not edit Jeremy Thrain.
I wish you had, actually.
Me too.
I wish someone had.
But it was done kind of under my aegis. Nothing more fascinating than corporate publishing, reorganizations, folks. But I'll spare you. But then I became your editor on the Epicures.
The Epicures Lament was our first book together,
Right.
Officially. Although I felt, that made an honest woman of me, because then we could really work together. But
Right.
you were really my editor.
I was your champion.
You're my absolute champion from the beginning.
And I liked you too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like you and your writing.
What do you mean by that? He was really your editor. Does that mean that he worked on the book very closely with
No,
you,
he
or he
didn't.
championed the book?
He was my champ. Like he just said, they weren't going to bring it out in paperback until Jerry, I think, put his foot down and said, absolutely. I think they really didn't know what to make of me. I got the feeling. And In the Drink was rejected, I think, 27 times.
Oh, for Christ's sake.
All over New York.
I'm sorry you told me that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But it all ended happily.
You can send
far.
website.
But what I mean is that I think my editor on Jeremy Thrain, whose name I can hardly remember, was fired right before it came out.
She kind of faded away.
She faded away into the, and so Jerry, although he didn't edit those two books, was, I felt, he ushered them into the world and championed them.
Yeah. So that's how it all started. I think we have a lot in common in terms of sensibility. We like a lot of the same books. At my urging, Kate wrote an essay for Salon called Loser Lit, defining the genre of book about, hapless and somewhat maybe unlikable characters.
Some people think they're unlikable.
Well, it depends on your taste in human beings. So let's take them off so that everybody can. So first off,
let's hear
Joyce Carey.
Joyce Carey, The Horse's Mouth.
David Gates' Jernigan, which I think you like more than I do.
I'm not sure. I haven't read it in a while.
Okay.
But, I loved it for a long time. Lucky Jim.
Yeah, Lucky
Kingsley
Jim.
Amis.
Elliot Baker's.
Which he likes more than I do.
Let me give the title.
Sorry.
Don't step on my mind. What's the title? A Fine Man Lives. Very good movie, actually, with Sean Connery. Better than you would think. Certain nude scenes, which spoke to me at age 15, very profoundly.
Sean Connery was nude now.
Don't remember that. Yeah, that kind of book. I suppose a number of Philip Roth's heroes, but we might have never really done it. But that sort of book, people, characters who are sorely at odds with themselves in the world
and overeducated and not nearly as successful as they feel they should be. And they're sort of, I think a lot of the magic of those books for me comes in for example, Gully Jimson, whose idea about himself is that he's a painter in London in the 30s, set in the 30s. And his idea is that he's just entitled to do whatever he wants because he's a great artist.
Oh, The Ginger Man.
Oh, and the Ginger Man.
Yes, how could we forget?
Yes.
That kind of thing, the entitled guy.
The entitled guy.
Yeah.
There are definitely shades of Gully Jimson in Harry Quirk, in that Gully is a mess as a human being, and yet there's something really present and connected and kind of joyous about him. And the same thing is true of Harry. Was that purposeful on your part to make that connection?
Well, it's so flattering to hear that. I mean, I use various novels as touchstones when I'm writing a book, and for The Astral, it was Gully Jimson. It was The Horse's Mouth, and also that breed of detective novel in which the detective has to solve the crime because he's been accused of it and he's innocent. And in this case, the crime is the end of his marriage, and so he hustles around Greenpoint trying to prove his innocence, which in the end, of course, it being love that's dead is impossible. But I wanted that sort of narrative, that sort of noir kind of narrative energy, but also The Horse's Mouth, for sure.
It really is reminiscent of that. And also one of the other things he feels so strongly in The Horse's Mouth is the landscapes he's moving through. Because, I don't know if all of you have read it, but because he's a visual artist, there are just really incredibly bizarre and really beautiful descriptions of London. And I found the same thing in this book, that whole north end of Brooklyn is so incredibly evoked in this book. Did you see that as well, Jared?
Oh, yeah, and
amazing
I'm a Brooklyn native. Really, I am, folks. And from from a part without brownstones.
Don't let his tan fool you.
Bayreuth, say what?
Don't let the tan fool you.
Yeah, it's all man tan. Do they still make that? Anyway, my parents were from Brooklyn. I grew up in Bay Ridge. I really didn't know that part of Brooklyn at all. It's really remote, and I think the first time I was ever there when
came
I
to my
visited
house.
you guys, and you know the sexy Polish girls, and that
It's
I
all
noticed.
true, right?
Yeah, they're
Really hot.
they really are. You know, it's like a kielbasa fest. It really is. But there are these old houses that look like the set for Arsenic and Old Lace. You know, it's a really interesting. And then of course it's semi-industrial. You can see the history of Brooklyn and its industrial and waterfront past is still visible, and you really got it, you know.
I lived there a long time, 20 years or something in North Brooklyn. So I feel like I've never lived anywhere else that long. I feel like I arrived as sort of wide-eyed girl from Arizona and a total outsider in Brooklyn, and then there was suddenly a switch, and suddenly I was like, God, all these new people, Jesus. Like crabby and angry, this old timer, all of a sudden. But I feel like it's a powerful place. It's got layers and layers of time, much more than Williamsburg. I don't know how many of you know Greenpoint. It's really, I mean, I felt changed by it. I feel like everyone who comes there becomes a Greenpointer. You don't change the place. The place has its own power. Williamsburg is completely screwed up, but you know, walk over to Greenpoint and it's simultaneously, you know, any year from whenever it started to now, it's all the layers of time sort of coexist, and it's haunted. You really feel the people there. This is how Harry Cork emerged, was from watching the people around Greenpoint. But when the Epicure's Lament came out, I cooked one of the meals that the narrator of the Epicure's Lament cooks, kind of the Christmas dinner that he makes at the end before he's going to off himself, and invited Jerry and his wife over for dinner to enjoy this meal in my Arsenic and Old Lace row house in Greenpoint that my then husband and I were renovating. It was really in the early stages. And Jerry walked in like, holy shit, this neighborhood is kind of weird. It's amazing. Remember that?
Yeah, and I mean Brooklyn really contains multitudes. Do you know there's a neighborhood in Brooklyn, or at least there was, called Finntown? For Christ's sake, a Finnish neighborhood.
No, really?
Yeah, I'm not kidding.
Where?
I have no idea. I think it may be in the vicinity of Sunset Park. Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah. So we have that in common too, a kind of feeling for Brooklyn as a place that,
Yeah.
It's also kind of quintessentially New York book, not only in the description of Brooklyn, but because of that sense of people coming together and creating a kind of family of friends, and then the evolution and dissolution of that family of friends over years is really interesting. Maybe that's a phenomenon everywhere, but it seems to me, especially in my own life, and people come from other places, they come into New York or Brooklyn, and they constitute themselves into these groups of people. Maybe they knew a couple of them from college, and they become a kind of surrogate family. And you really set that up. Can you talk a little bit about that part of the book?
Well, I think what's happening in the book is that he's 57, and so it's sort of, although I'm not 57 yet, casting myself forward in the future, I imagine that sort of your late 50s are a time when you are who you are. And there is a certain resistance to change that may set in. And he gets kicked out of his house by his wife. I mean, his whole life is upended. And I thought of him as a sort of very vulnerable person because of that, and because of the fact that this once close-knit, I mean, when you're young, you come to New York and you meet your soulmates, you know, your friends. I'm friends with people who I met in 1989 when I first got here, and I met, you know, it's just people come at you and you're young and malleable and you sort of glom onto them and it's so exciting.
And they glom on you.
And they glom onto you and there's this big happy warm glomming, and then as the years go by,
The glomming.
the glomming
What's
sort
your
of,
next one?
it sort of attenuates or chills into separate lives. People get married, they have kids, they leave the city, but then there are fights between people, or breaks, or ruptures, or rifts that I hadn't foreseen when I first moved to New York, that I experienced in all my years here that shocked me. Like, I thought we were friends for life, but we're not. Okay. And then, but I mean, even among groups of friends, I had a very sort of close-knit group of friends when I arrived, and people came in and out, and it was all very fluid. And now it's not a group anymore. We're friends individually with some people. Some people hate other people because somebody screwed somebody's wife, or there was a business deal gone sour, or, I mean, and this is what Harry is facing, really, is this disintegration of the paradise that is New York when you're young. It changes as you get older.
It's interesting, too, that both his kids really want to have things controlled and have things fixed for them. I mean, Hector, the son, goes off and joins a cult, and then quickly within the cult becomes the kind of messiah figure in the cult. And the daughter is a freegan, which is another way, I think, of controlling your universe or controlling your environment. And she's trying to help everyone in the novel, but it's also a little bit about controlling others and controlling your environment, which is, and Luz, clearly his wife, is pretty controlling as well. Although you have to say that Harry controls things to the extent that he gets to sit around and write poetry without having to work for a long time.
That's the nice thing about writing, is that you get to control whatever you're working on, even though everything around you is, towers are falling, people are assholes, and everything's
It's nice to know there's a nice thing about writing. I find it such a miserable process. But one of the things that I thought about and that we talked about in respect to Luz that was both interesting but that I questioned. In my observation, birds of a feather in New York flock together and tend to create these exclusive groups and tend to look on other groups as, well, inferior because they're not us, And I think this is particularly, I'm not naming names, but strong among people with cultural aspirations. And so Luz who's his wife, who is the kind of outlier in the group because she's a nurse. She's a nurse. She's Nurse Jackie, really, in a way. And she works at St. Vincent's. Boy, I miss St. Vincent's, and terrible. Yeah. And so you and I talked about how to make credible that she would be part of this slightly utopian, hey, we're all artists together group and not get looked down on. And yet, I think you succeeded in both giving the sense that she came from an interesting cultured background where her family was lettered, as it were. And so none of the Harry Quirk circle was alien to her, and yet she was kind of like the solid citizen, not to mention the person with the paycheck, which is always useful to have in a household, in case you didn't know.